In 1990, there was another crisis between India and Pakistan, a major crisis, and you can read all about it in Seymour Hersh's article in the New Yorker in 1993. You know, um, they saw the intelligence community saw nuclear weapons moving to air bases and being put on F-16s, etc. So the nuclear weapons that Pakistan did not possess, according to the president of the United States, were actually being stuck on. So the deputy director of Central Intelligence, the number two in the whole community, he said it was the scariest thing since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And my former boss, Robert Gates, he was the DDCI when I was at CIA. He was the NSC advisor at that point, I believe. And, the president was so concerned that he dispatched Gates to Islamabad and New Delhi to try to defuse the crisis. And, gets back to, the Pressler Amendment and our knowledge on, whether they had possessed. See, this is the key legal word in the amendment. And so all of the games being played by the lawyers and the State Department and et cetera, what constitutes possession? How much wiggle room is there? And the president continued to certify that Pakistan did not possess nuclear weapons all the way through 1989. Now, I can tell you that most of us in the CIA were not comfortable with that, to say the least. Okay, but we're not elected officials. All we can do is give the elected officials, the senior policymakers, the best intelligence information, accurate, that we can provide, that we can collect, and we can brief them on. What they do after that is we're not in control of that. They're the elected representatives of the American people, But there was very grave concerns as to how this was continuing, What happened in 1990, which I'll get into, I was not in the government exactly because I was working for the Secretary of Defense. We haven't gone into all that. And I had been removed from my job and had my security clearance suspended. So, I wasn't in when that was happening. But in 1990, there was another crisis between India and Pakistan, a major crisis. And you can read all about it in Seymour Hersh's article in the New Yorker in 1993. They saw the intelligence community saw nuclear weapons moving to air bases and being put on F-16s, etc. So the nuclear weapons that Pakistan did not possess, according to the president of the United States, were actually being stuck on. So, as I said, I was not involved, but I spoke to people at the CIA very high up, and they gave interviews to Hersh, to Cy Hersh. Dick Kerr, the DDI, the head of the
Deputy Director of Intelligence of the CIA.
But then by now he's become the DDCI, the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, the number two in the whole community. He said it was the scariest thing since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And my former boss, Robert Gates, he was the DDCI when I was at CIA. He was the NSC advisor at that point, I believe. And, the president was so concerned that he dispatched Gates to Islamabad and New Delhi to try to defuse the crisis. And, that's all discussed in the article because Gates was interviewed and I was interviewed and Dick Kerr was interviewed, etc. And my interview, by the way, I mean, for the record, you know, on like January 1st, 1993, my phone rang. And it was Seymour. I had never, for all of what had happened to me, having my life destroyed, my marriage, I had never talked to a reporter about any of this. And the phone rang, and it was Seymour Hersh, who had pretty much most of the top secret story. I mean, I almost had a heart attack. And by this point, I'd been dealing pretty extensively with the CIA Inspector General, Fred Hitz. So Cy wanted to come spend a week with me or some days with me. I lived in Santa Fe at that point. And, you know, I said, let me get back to you. And, you know, I called Fred Hitz and I said, Fred, he wants to come interview me for 3 or 4 days. He's got most of the top secret code word story. What should I do? He said, don't do anything. I'll get back to you. And he got back to me in a few days and he said, the director, meaning Bob Gates, said, do the interview and don't screw up. So I did. So that was approved, you know, and I was then told that from the director that I did a good job and protected sources and methods and caused no harm to the CIA. So that's how it started. But after the 1990 nuclear crisis, my bosses at the agency, the director, they refused to go along. They put their foot down at that point and refused to go along with any more certifications. Believe it or not, there were still people in the U.S. government that wanted to certify under the Pressler Amendment. I mean, they were having a collective heart attack because they knew it was over, the aid, etc. The Pressler Amendment was going to be triggered, you know. And people in the Pentagon and in the regional office and the State Department were having heart attacks, you know. But it really didn't make that much difference anymore because the Cold War was over. The Soviet Union collapsed around that time, you know. So it was convenient.
Pakistan needed another blackmail tool to get more aid from America, clearly. And so the reason why I ask you this is, you know, in May, we had this conflict between India and Pakistan where cruise missiles flew across borders. And the threat of nuclear war again came up. President Trump has spoken about it. You compare the rhetoric that we've been hearing right now about this nuclear bogey of Pakistan's, and you compare it with what happened in 1990. What do you think was more of a pressing concern?
Oh, I think, you know, from what I know, I don't know all the details of the events of this spring, you know.
Yeah.
But from what I do know, the 1990 situation was far more scary for a number of reasons. Number one, you know, you had actual nuclear weapons coming out of their hidden tunnels, moving to delivery platforms. I mean, maybe that happened this year. If it did, I haven't heard about it. You know, so you know. Secondly, there's a command and control issue. Pakistan had very, very few nuclear weapons in those days. They did not have missile delivery capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. They're far more advanced now, you know, and I'm sure the Indians are too. So there was a much greater chance of miscalculation in 1990 and miscommunication, et cetera. So I think that was a far more dangerous period. I mean, you know, from the press that I saw about the events of the spring, I mean, it was, you know, 2 nuclear-armed nations. You know, I mean, we all know that, but I didn't see any specifics about nuclear weapons being moved or deployed. Could have happened, but I haven't heard it. There's a difference, you know.